Hi, Dr. Goldhamer, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I really love talking to you. So you co-wrote a wonderful book called The Pleasure Trap. What is the pleasure trap?
Well, the pleasure trap's based on the idea that there's an artificial stimulation of the dopamine cascade leads to specific behavioral changes. For example, when we talk about the dietary pleasure trap, when people get exposed to chemicals that are added to their food like salt, oil, and sugar, there's an artificial stimulation of dopamine production that leads to predictable overeating, and that's why people get fat, sick, and miserable. So the idea is that you can fool this very natural, necessary mechanism, and the way we fool it in the case of diet is by adding chemicals to the food that artificially stimulate that response.
And what are these chemicals specifically?
They're salt, oil, and sugar are the most common ones. We talk about an SOS-free diet because it's not only the international symbol of danger, but it also stands for salt, oil, and sugar. When you think about salt, oil, and sugar, they're not actually foods. They're food byproducts that have been concentrated that are added to actual food in order to stimulate dopamine production in our brain. Dopamine is the neurochemical in the brain that induces the response you and I know of as pleasure. The more dopamine, the more pleasure. And so when you add these highly concentrated chemicals to the food, your brain perceives that as a good thing because more is better. Our bodies, our minds, have evolved in an environment of scarcity. So in the world of our ancient ancestors, the key to survival was get enough to eat, don't get eaten. If you managed to get enough to eat, not get eaten, and live long enough to reproduce, you won, and you got to pass on your DNA. And we carry the DNA of the winners, not the losers. You know, those losers that didn't get enough to eat, or they got eaten, they didn't reproduce. Our relatives were the winners. That's why we carry these characteristics that, although in a natural setting serve us well, in the modern environment can actually be a problem. Because we've changed the environment such that now we have access to these highly concentrated, highly processed foods. And so although our brain is still dealing with a world of scarcity, our bodies are living in a world of abundance. And when you put those together, the resulting is very predictable. And that's consistent gaining of weight.
Wow. So is it possible to escape the dietary pleasure trap?
It's really difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult things people do in their life, which is why I think so many people fail, because they don't understand how much effort it actually takes to successfully escape the dietary pleasure trap. And some people, it's even more difficult than others, just depending on their satiety mechanisms, their personality traits, and perhaps even their emotional scar tissue, things that have happened to them in the past. All of these various components can add up to making something more or less difficult. But even for those people that are fortunate enough to not carry a lot around a lot of emotional baggage, that have good training, good support, it's still very difficult because you've got 1 billion years of evolution that says eat the most concentrated food you can get, eat as much as you can get, and push everybody else out of the way, basically.
Well, there are people walking around today that are eating sugar, oil, salt, and perhaps are not overweight. So is everyone susceptible to this pleasure trap?
I think everybody's susceptible to some degree, but some people much more so than others. For example, if you just happen to be born with very sensitive satiety mechanisms, you would have less tendency to overeat, even on highly concentrated food. But if you have normal satiation mechanisms, you're going to get fat if you eat these processed foods. The only question is how fat are you going to get, and that'll depend on how much of those foods you eat. And so I think, yes, it's true. It's just like some people are tall and some people are short. Some people have sensitivities to, say, for example, environmental issues, toxins, et cetera. Other people are a little bit more resistant. There's a variation, there's a range in there. But for the normal person, if they eat salt, oil, and sugar, they will end up overeating overall compared to if they didn't.
So we could tell how sensitive our satiety mechanisms are by how fat we get on the standard American diet?
To some extent, there's probably a good correlation. If you're one of those people that can have, that open up the package of cookies and just have one and put the other away, you may not be quite as vulnerable as the person that opens up the package of cookies and the next thing they know, there's no cookies. What happened to the cookies? They think they got ripped off by the time they got home from the store sometimes.
Wow. Do you think, Dr. Goldhamer, that a person can be overweight without compromising their health to some degree?
I think to the degree that you're overweight, there will be some consequence of that. Although, it's not the fat per se that's the main difficulty. Fat is just storage. You're designed to store fat. It's the diet you eat that allows you to be fat that's the problem. So it's not that a given pound of fat is some horrific issue that has to be resolved at all costs, but the diet that allows you to overeat consistently enough to become overweight is the diet that promotes inflammation, is the diet that makes you sick. So we shouldn't see the fat as the main culprit, but just as a result of poor eating habits. And it's poor eating habits that are always a problem.
What are the main health risks with being overweight?
Oh my gosh, there's almost no condition that you can't find at least some indirect correlation with obesity. The process of eating dietary excess promotes, for example, inflammation, and inflammation is associated with cardiovascular disease, and joint pain, and autoimmune disease down the road, and probably also cancer. Depending on what you're eating to become overweight, probably will correlate with the risk factors that result from being overweight. And there's also mechanical factors as well. There's really nothing about being significantly overweight that's anything but a health compromising process for people. And it's something that we should be looking at as a marker. If we're overweight, we know we're either caught in the dietary pleasure trap or we're not getting enough sleep and activity.
You said that being overweight can possibly even be linked to certain cancers. Is it the fat itself that promotes the cancer, or is it the diet that the person ate to get fat that promotes the cancer, or perhaps both?
Well, it's probably both, but I think that it's the diet that you eat that's responsible for the end result that we should see as the main culprit. In other words, think about this. So let's say somebody's overweight and they change their diet. The day they change their diet, they start losing weight, and their risk factors begin to drop dramatically. They don't have to have all the weight loss gone in order to have reduced the risk factors. That happens long before the weight is gone. So because as soon as you change the cause of the problem, which is the diet that makes you fat, the inflammation, the other factors start to go down almost immediately. So even if you're substantially overweight, you can dramatically reduce the consequences of your health compromise and just wait for the weight to take care of itself. If you're a female, we expect weight loss to average about 2 pounds a week on a health promoting diet with consistent exercise. If you're a male, it's about 3 pounds a week. So males will on average lose about 50% more weight than females, in large part because they have testosterone, a fat burning hormone. And women have estrogen, which is actually a fat storage hormone. In fact, if you inject men with estrogen, they get fat. They grow breasts and get hips. If you inject women with testosterone, they would begin losing fat. The problem is, of course, you don't want to do that because they get hair and cancer and die. So it's not a good strategy as far as weight loss. But the bottom line is a lot of these differences are biological differences. But it is true that if a man and woman go on a diet together, husband and wife, you will find that the wife will have to work significantly harder on average than the male will be to achieve the same degree of weight loss.
Great, thank you. Are there certain foods that everyone should avoid, even if they're not overweight, to help prevent them from certain diseases like cancer?
Well, I tell patients that one simple rule, if they don't know whether they should have something, is they should go inside themselves and ask themselves honestly, do I really want and need whatever the substance is? And if the answer comes back, yes, you really want it, then you know. You can't have it. You get nothing. Anything you really want like that is probably a bad thing. So now it's true that over time, the desire and appreciation of fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds increases. And the desire for meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar diminishes. But it's the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar that need to be eliminated from the diet if the goal is to achieve optimum weight, increased health, and ultimately happiness.
Great. Well, sometimes when I ask myself what I really want, it's Brussels sprouts. That's okay, right?
Well, I think you've made the transition to the point where less stimulating, but wonderfully enjoyable whole natural foods become more appealing. But there's a difference between wanting Brussels sprouts and really wanting chocolate cheesecake. So, it's not that you don't want good foods. What you really want, though, is often something that, may not be desirable. And the reason is because it contains salt, oil, and sugar, and it's going to artificially stimulate dopamine in your brain in a drug-like manner. So it doesn't mean you won't enjoy your foods. You will, and you'll enjoy them more and more as time goes on, whole natural foods. But there's nothing quite as stimulating as the pleasure trap.
Well, why does the chocolate cheesecake stimulate our brain and not the Brussels sprouts?
Because the chocolate has 2,500 calories a pound and the Brussels sprouts have a couple hundred calories a pound. Because the chocolate has 10 times the caloric density, the brain of yours, which evolved in an environment of scarcity, believes that that chocolate is 10 times more valuable. Because the brain evolved in an environment where whoever got the most calories managed to survive. Remember, most humans born on the planet did not live to reproduce. They died before they passed on their genes. They were the losers and they were not your relatives. Your relatives ate the most concentrated food they could get their hands on. If they were lucky, they got enough to survive.
Well, I had the benefit of being a patient at the True North Health Center many years ago that helped me learn to love Brussels sprouts and not love chocolate. But how does the average person do that?
It's actually just a question of time. For example, if you're used to a high salt diet, it'll take on average about a month of low sodium eating to adapt to a low salt diet. So at first it's kind of disgusting because you're so addicted to the artificial stimulation of the sodium that's added to the food. But over time you go through taste neuroadaptation. The tastes actually adapt. And now you get to the point where the previous hypersalted food is actually unappealing or less appealing, and the healthier food becomes more appealing. You'll eat something like chard and think, my goodness, it's very salty, whereas the person on a high salt diet doesn't even notice it. So it's a question of neuroadapting. Now, unfortunately, with fat, it takes people about 3 months on average to neuroadapt their satiety mechanisms to a lower fat diet. So for 3 months, their brain is saying, look, you're not getting enough to eat. Go get me some concentrated fats so I can be satisfied. I can reach satiety. But after enough weeks, the body begins to adapt, so the brown rice and broccoli becomes satisfying, and you don't have to have all the greasy, fatty, processed materials on there in order to stimulate the brain to know that you've gotten enough. You want to think about this. Your brain is not trying to get you thin. Your brain is trying to keep you stable. Your brain says, why would you give up important fat reserves when spring could come late and then you could die? Your brain is trying to keep those fat reserves, whatever they are, on your body so that you can survive periods of deprivation, like, for example, when spring comes late. And so you're actually overriding your brain's best judgment when you induce a hypocaloric diet and begin the process of weight loss. When you're losing weight, your brain is signaling you, hey, stupid, wake up. We're hemorrhaging strategic fat stores. Stop it. That's the pain of weight loss, is your brain telling you you're hemorrhaging an important reserve commodity. It worked hard to store those fat reserves. It doesn't want to just give them up. And so you're forcing that issue by controlling, for example, the number of hours that you eat or the type of caloric density of the food you eat. And yes, you will progressively lose weight, but not without objection. Now you notice once you reach a weight, I don't care what it is, it's a lot easier to stabilize than it is to actively lose. Because when you're stable, I think your brain's a little bit happier. Even whatever your weight is, as long as you're not, quote, underweight, your brain is saying, okay, fine, everything's nice and stable. You're not actively losing.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're saying that it takes about 90 days for people to neuroadapt to a lower fat diet. So they could conceivably be eating large volumes of food and feel mechanically full, but
Right.
still have cravings.
Unsatisfied.
So what do you do?
Craving mechanisms is a brain signal, yes, you've gotten what you need. And of course it varies. Some people have very sensitive systems and other people are less sensitive. And so some people have to work a lot harder than other people do to achieve the same levels. In fact, that's a lot of times where people have a value judgment. They think because one person's fat and another's not, oh, the fat person must be lazy or sleep too much or eat dramatically more food than the other person. That's not necessarily the case, because you can have somebody who has very sensitive satiety mechanisms. They're eating the same kind of food, but they're just more sensitive to it. As a consequence, there's less likelihood to overeat. You have one person has a very high metabolic rate, a lot of activity. Another person maybe has, a different metabolism, more efficient. I want you to think about this, though, from a biological viewpoint. Gaining fat, the ability to gain weight easily, is actually a good thing. It means your plumbing works. You can eat food, absorb it, and hold on to it. That's not a bad thing biologically. A much more serious potential problem is a person that they can eat anything, but they never gain any weight. That's not necessarily a good thing at all. Those people can be difficult to deal with when they get into trouble. Now, on the other hand, the person that gains weight easily has to be very sensitive to the dietary pleasure trap. Because if they're very efficient and they get exposed to the flour products, the sugar products, too concentrated, even some of the whole natural foods that are very concentrated. If they get exposed to too much of them, they will have difficulty losing weight. Whereas the person with very sensitive satiety mechanism, they can just have one and they're done. Whereas the other person, you know, is going to continue to eat until they feel satisfied, which may entail substantial overeating. So that's the thing I want to get through here is I think that a lot of the difference in who has the most trouble and not is actually genetically mediated, biologically inborn differences, not personality differences necessarily.
Oh, that's good to know. So what do we do during this period of neuroadaptation when we're uncomfortable because we're having cravings until we eventually neuroadapt to a low salt or no salt, lower fat diet?
You suffer. Yeah, it's difficult. Like I said, it's why I said earlier, it's one of the most difficult things people do. You have to go through a little bit of suffering. It's just like, what do you do when you start an exercise program and you're a little bit sore? You have to work through it. And what do, you know, when you're in a new situation and you feel anxious because you're new to the situation, you have to work through it. These feelings are signals of your brain telling you that it's concerned. And when you're losing weight and your brain is telling you, hey, you're losing weight, you need to understand this is a normal biological symptom, that this is your brain in a natural setting warning you of something that would be a danger. You have to remember you're not in that setting anymore and it's okay. That pain you're feeling is the experience of weight loss. And if you can embrace that pain as an experience of weight loss, you may be able to, you know, you eliminate the fear component, which would normally be associated with those feelings, saying of your brain telling you you're in trouble. You have to override it, if you will. Recognize the fact that yes, you're losing fat, but it's okay because you don't have to worry about spring coming late anymore.
Does everyone eventually neuroadapt in terms of taste? I know you've done some research at the True North Health Center about taste neuroadaptation.
Well, we'll know a little bit more about that soon because I'm happy to say we're on the final subject of a study we've done in measuring exactly this, taste neuroadaptation, that looks at the changes in taste both with diet and also with medically supervised water-only fasting. You know, one of the problems that people have, if it's too difficult for them because it's too painful to go through these changes, one of the tricks we do is we lock them up at the True North Health Center and put them through medically supervised fasting, which is also an intense and miserable process, but it's quick. So it's a way of dramatically shortening the amount of time that it takes, not only to lose weight, but to neuroadapt and clear out the body and to unwind the toxicity that's often associated with dietary excess. So there are tools available to people that are struggling with this. One of those tools, at least for some people, is the use of fasting, and that's what we do at the True North Health Center.
That's great. Many people that already follow a plant-based diet or a whole food plant-based diet understand why not to eat oil. It harms the endothelial. It's 4,000 calories a pound. But where you're a little bit different is the no sugar and no salt. Now, salt has no calories and sugar has 4 calories a gram. So what difference does it make? A little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt? We could still lose weight.
Well, one thing, we'll talk about sugar first. Refined carbohydrates, sugar, flour products, are highly concentrated foods that provide very little satiety feedback in the sense there's no fiber. They also alter the gut microbiome, the bacteria that live in your gut. You have about 5 pounds of bacteria right now living in your gut. 5 pounds. That's like, you know, a kidney or a liver. It's a big set of organisms, living creatures that are breathing and eating and pooing inside you. And right now, that 5 pounds of creatures can either be pooing fertilizer like vitamin K and other nutritive substances, or toxic waste like TMA, which becomes TMAO, which is highly irritating and causes heart disease and cancer and other kinds of problems. And what your bacteria poo in you depends on what you feed your bacteria. So if you feed your bacteria soluble fibers like sweet potatoes and starchy vegetables, you get fertilizer. If you feed them meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, you get toxic waste. So make sure your bacteria are pooing healthy stuff into you. And something like sugar can change not only what the bacteria are pooing into you, but what type of bacteria are living in your gut. You have about 1,000 different strains of bacteria that kind of keep each other in check. But if you put in a high sugar environment, you get a different microflora. And so especially in vulnerable people, a little bit may make a big difference, not just in the calories, but the effect that it has biologically. Sugar also can be immunosuppressive, so it affects things like neutrophil phagocytosis or other types of measures of immune function. And so we're just learning about all the different effects that that these refined carbohydrates have. Now, some people say, well, what about salt? There's no calories in salt. So how could that be related to weight loss? And all I ask you to do is a little simple home experiment. One day, eat your fill of rice, just how much rice you would eat before you feel satiated. And the next day, after having followed a similar pattern of activity during the day, sit down, eat the same amount of rice that's salted up. And what you'll find is before you feel satisfied, you will eat significantly more rice that's been salted, because we know that salt stimulates what's called passive overeating. So if you eat to where you're full without salt, it ends up being a different amount of calories than if you eat to where you're full with salt. And the amount of calories you eat in salted food is actually higher before you reach satisfaction. People say, well, no, I overeat because it tastes good. Well, what do you think tasting good means? In large part, it means how much dopamine is stimulated in your brain when you put something in your mouth. The more caloric density the food has, the more stimulating the food is, the better response your body has in terms of its nutritive value. Because your brain is evaluating nutritive value based on caloric density. The higher the density, the better. Well, in a natural setting, that's true. But in the world we live in today, where you're trying not to become fat, sick, and miserable, it's not so true. So leave the salt out.
One of the studies I read about the passive overconsumption caused by adding salt said that it actually causes us to particularly eat more fat.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that's great. In fact, I'd like to actually get that paper from you because I haven't read that one. So
I'm absolutely, after the interview, happy to send you the article. So I thought that was actually quite interesting.
Some of the more interesting stuff I've read lately has come from you. So keep sending stuff.
Thank you. Dr. Goldhamer, what causes food cravings? Is there anything we can do to get rid of them, or special foods we can eat or not eat to help alleviate them?
Yeah, fortunately, cravings, like all addictions, diminish over time and exposure. So if you stop doing it over time, you'll desensitize and avoid those, unless you go back and seed yourself again. If you want to make it happen quicker, the most powerful way of breaking these cycles is fasting. Water-only fasting, it's remarkable. Like even smokers, where nicotine's a pretty powerful addiction, people try to quit over and over again, and they struggle and fail. And they come in and fast. By the end of the second or third day of fasting, most of our smokers report no cravings. Now, some people say, yeah, they're so miserable fasting, they don't even think about the cigarettes, but that's not true. What it is that those processes associated with withdrawal happen more quickly during fasting. And so we like to use fasting to help people break bad habits, whether it be cigarettes, alcohol, caffeine, or the use of salt, oil, sugar, or animal-based foods. So, the best thing you need to do is stop it. And the best way to stop it is, if you can't do it on your own, get yourself locked up and have a little bit of help.
Great. Do you think most people are addicts? It's just a matter of degree and substance?
Well, all people are vulnerable to addiction, and it depends on exposure. If you never smoke, you don't become addicted to smoking. If you never drink alcohol, you don't become an alcoholic. And if you don't eat salt, oil, and sugar, you don't end up getting caught in the dietary pleasure trap, and then you aren't going to be overweight and suffer the consequences of that obesity.
Nice. What's wrong with animal products like dairy in terms of both health and weight loss?
Well, dairy is this very special food because it's an animal food and it's a highly processed pleasure trap food. So it gets, like everything, it gets the benefit of being easy to overeat, being high in saturated fat, tons of salt. And the other thing that's got all the biological concentration problems of animal foods. All animal foods biologically concentrate the poisons from their environment and the drugs they're given, et cetera, in their cells. And when you kill and eat the animal, you get its entire lifetime accumulation of poisons. That's why if you look calorie per calorie, you can have anywhere from 2 to 1,000 times the concentration of toxins in a calorie of animal food versus a calorie of plant food. It doesn't mean there's not some exposure in plant foods, particularly if they're not organically grown, but it's not as biologically concentrated as it is in animal foods. And so animal foods are, especially dairy products, are very special. Of course, dairy products also have a lot of contaminants, not the least of which is pus. In fact, there's a law that limits how much pus you can have in milk products, no more than 750,000 pus cells per cc. And that's kind of disgusting when you think about that. And of course, in fairness, not all animal food has 750,000 pus cells. The average milk product, I believe, only has about half that, somewhere around 322,000 pus cells per cc. It's essentially like finding a cow with a festering wound, sticking a straw into it and sucking.
Oh my. You founded the True North Health Center with your wife, Dr. Jennifer Marano, over 30 years ago, and I think you get something like over 10,000 patients a year. Do you notice any improvement, or are people just getting fatter and sicker?
Well, of the patients that we're treating, understand, we've seen 16,000 people through the True North Health Center since 1984. But those patients are very special people because they're somebody else's most motivated, conscientious patient. So the people that are referred to us, they wouldn't know about us unless somebody's sending them in, or they're specifically trying to look up, say, something like fasting on the internet. And so as a consequence, our patients do very well, but it's also our patients, aren't maybe the average patient. There are people that are appropriately motivated. The best motivation I found is pain, debility, and fear of death. So if you have a person that's motivated because they don't want to die, they're in agonizing pain, or they're debilitated by conditions like autoimmune disease or high blood pressure or diabetes or lymphoma, they're so desperate they're willing to do anything, even eat well, exercise, go to bed on time, or fasting. And those patients do very, very well at the True North Health Center. I'm not so sure that people that are not appropriately motivated would benefit as much. And so we tend to focus on those people that are either very sick or very smart.
Well, what are the consequences for people that aren't willing to escape the dietary pleasure trap?
Well, we know what the consequences. Just look around you. They get fat, sick, and miserable. They die a slow and painful death. They find themselves unable to talk or move, lying in a nursing home bed, waiting for somebody to come and change their diaper for the last 10 years of their life.
But the foods that you want people to not eat are so pleasurable. How are we supposed to get pleasure if we can't have these things?
Well, you get pleasure from whole natural foods when you neuroadapt more and more as time goes on. But it's the same question of, people like the feeling of cocaine when they smoke cocaine, or when they smoke marijuana or drink alcohol. So of course these foods are appealing and these drugs are appealing. Otherwise people wouldn't use them because they're disgusting and have terrible side effects and they're expensive. So people do it because they like the way it makes them feel, and they're designed to artificially stimulate dopamine production in the brain. That's the nature of addiction, where you eat or take something not just because it makes you feel good, but if you stop, it makes you feel very, very bad. You notice that doesn't happen if you stop eating carrots. You can stop eating carrots and not feel, nobody wakes up and says, oh dear, I got to go down to the store and get me some carrots. I can't wait till tomorrow. These foods are not artificially stimulating. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy eating carrots. You will. But you're not going to get the same artificial stimulation that you get from smoking cocaine.
Wow. That's incredible. A lot of people have been told the only way they can lose weight is to count calories, carbs, points, weigh and measure their food on a plate for the rest of their life. Yet at the True North Health Center, your dinner plates are larger than most people have at home. Most people have 8 or 9-inch dinner plates. Yours are 11-inch dinner plates, and you serve 3 all-you-can-eat buffets. And yet people still lose weight. How is that possible?
Well, they're eating a large volume of low-density foods. So the secret to weight loss is eating more and sleeping more. If you eat more and sleep more, your energy and metabolic rate is higher. You reach satiety from eating large amounts of low caloric density, high nutrient density foods. So we have people eating large amounts of salad. We know, if you don't, the weighing and measuring would only be to make sure you got enough. So we want to get at least a large enough salad that if your friends saw you eating it, they would go, oh my gosh, you're not going to eat all that, are you? They should look at you with shock and awe. If they don't have shock and awe, you got the wrong size bowl. You got to go get a bigger bucket. Because the key is you have to eat so much low density food that there's just not room left for the more concentrated, highly stimulating foods that everybody else wants to eat.
You mentioned salads, low-calorie dense foods. You have a 24-hour salad bar at the True North Health Center, and you serve steamed vegetables at every meal, including breakfast. So many people say they just hate vegetables and they just won't eat them. Do you think vegetables or fruits and vegetables are important for health in general, but for weight loss in particular? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's the base of the diet, because these are where your nutrition, your fiber comes from, and there's a lot of volume with very little caloric density. So it's a key. The reason people hate them, though, is because they're addicted to the artificial stimulation of sugar, oil, and salt, highly processed pleasure trap foods. Once you break that addiction, whether it's through time, healthy eating, or with fasting, good foods start to taste good. So there's a transition, a transformation, a revolution that takes place for people who come in and they can't stand the disgusting, tasteless vegetables and fruits. By the time they're done, they often find they're actually tremendously enjoyable. Now, that doesn't mean everybody will like every single type of vegetable and every single type of food. Fortunately, there's so many, you can just focus on those that eventually you do like. And the ones that don't particularly appeal to you, that's not going to be the end of the world. You can just hold on those for now. Focus on the ones that you do like.
Well, some people are proponents of just, say, eating just potatoes for weight loss, but do you think it's a good idea ever to just eliminate vegetables?
Well, I don't think so. I think that for most people, a balance of fruits and vegetables is going to be a really good, long-term, sustainable, and successful way of eating. Although it is true, for example, if we just took brown rice and broccoli and we actually did a nutrient breakdown, and you got all your calories from brown rice and broccoli, you get all the protein, vitamins, and minerals that you need in order to stay in health, except for vitamin B12. Because the modern vegan diet, that is without animal foods and kind of washing and peeling, and because we don't want worms and parasites, does not have a lot of bacterial exposure. Vegans will become eventually susceptible to vitamin B12 deficiency. B12 is only found from bacterial contamination. Now, meat eaters shouldn't have to worry quite as much. If nothing else, they're getting all that nice fecal contamination of their dead, decaying flesh. But as far as plant eaters, particularly those that are following hygienic standards, eventually you can deplete B12 stores. That could be a problem. That's why we recommend the supplementation of 1,000 micrograms of vitamin B12 per day.
Great, thank you. Do you think people do better if they have support, for example, if their spouse or children are on board, or is it more difficult when they're going it alone?
Yeah, it's definitely more difficult in my experience for people that are socially isolated, that don't have anybody that is supportive of them. They don't actually need to have active support. They just have to have a few people that aren't offended just because they're making healthy diet habits. And it's particularly important in the household. It's hard enough to do this when you're motivated and have support. It's really difficult if there's frank antagonism. So what we're looking for isn't necessarily that everybody in your life has to be eating healthy. They just have to be willing to tolerate and be supportive of you. That you're not. It's very similar to alcoholism. If you're an alcoholic, it may not be reasonable to ask everybody you know not to drink, but it might be reasonable, for example, to ask your family not to have alcohol in the house that might be calling out your name. If they're going to drink, make it away from the home and away from you. That's not unreasonable. If you're struggling with weight loss, it's not unreasonable to explain to your family that you're struggling with an addiction to these particular foods. You're not trying to pass judgment on them for eating them, but maybe they can leave their processed foods locked up in a cabinet that you don't have a key to in the garage or something, so that you're not going to be tempted. It's not going to be calling your name. And that type of support, if you explain that it's your issue, you're not passing judgment on them because they choose to be self-indulgent, short-term pleasure-seeking people, then perhaps there's some way of finding a healthy balance. Because the problem is, if you have those foods in your house laying around in your moments of weakness, they're going to call your name, and it's going to be very difficult to resist them. It's one thing to do it when you're rested and feeling invigorated. It's another thing at the end of a long day when you're exhausted to continue to say no until you've done it for a while. Once you get out of the pleasure trap, it gets easier and easier.
So you do think the environment is important to our success?
Environment is very important. You have to create a supportive environment if you want to increase your chance of success. Now, that also includes at work. When you go to work and there's bowls full of candy and stuff calling your name out, it would be good to try to make it so that at least in your immediate workspace, you try to minimize that and make sure that you have a stash of health promoting options. If your blood sugars do drop, if you do feel hungry, there's something there for you to eat that's health promoting, so that it'll help you resist the temptation of these foods that are calling your name. They've actually taught ice cream to call out people's individual names. And I know that because patients tell me they can hear it going, eat me, eat me. They have to eat it sometimes just to shut it up. It's really difficult.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. So some of our speakers say that we should be eating more of our calories earlier in the day. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends on the person, their circumstance, and their life, exactly what their balance is. What we do recommend is that people limit their feeding window to the amount, and so that they have a period of fasting on a consistent basis. For example, let's say you eat your first meal and you're done by 9, and your last meal is done by 6, okay? So that's going to give you a period of time between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. that's fasting. And this intermittent fasting is thought to induce biological changes that are associated with promoting health, and it also narrows the tendency to be activating the cram circuits late in the evening. And as a consequence, just not eating foods that you're eating because you're tired or fatigued or angry may help facilitate weight loss. And so we say limit the feeding window to that amount of hours necessary to sustain optimum health. For example, if you're very energetic, you burn a lot of calories, you're young, maybe that window has to be a little bit broader. Maybe it's 10 or 12 hours. If you're older or more sedentary or have a highly efficient system, maybe it has to be an 8-hour window. So you may have to play with the exact amount of time. But the idea is to try to minimize the entertainment eating, the binge eating, the cram circuit activation as much as possible so that you can eat the amount of calories necessary to sustain optimum health and weight.
Just in case somebody is unfamiliar with the term the cram circuit, could you briefly explain what that is?
Well, the idea is that in a natural setting, there were occasional opportunities where you would get exposure to very calorically dense foods. And it would bode you well to take advantage of eating as much as you could in those rare instances when it became available. Well, of course, today, that's 3 times a day and everywhere you go. And so that circuitry that's designed to make sure that you store up extra fat to survive periods of deprivation are being activated each and every day, sometimes each and every meal. And as a consequence, people are becoming fatter and sicker by the day. That's why 2/3 of people are now overweight or obese, which means if you're not fat, you're abnormal. In fact, if you're overweight and you lose a bunch of weight and go to your doctor doesn't think, oh, good on you. You've adopted a plant-based diet and lost weight. I'm so proud of you. He thinks, or she thinks, you have either colon cancer, you've got developed an eating disorder, or you're a drug addict. And they're going to start getting worried and start doing testing. Because the fact is, people are not losing weight and keeping it off under conventional behavior patterns because they're caught in the dietary pleasure trap. The only time most physicians see anybody losing weight is when they develop drug addiction, eating disorders, or are sick often with cancer. The other thing that doctors don't get a chance to see is people getting well. If you have high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, or lymphoma, and you go to a doctor, they're going to tell you to take drugs. And they're going to promise you that if you do exactly what you're told, you'll never get well, that you'll be sick the rest of your life. Because they know their treatment will never allow you to recover, and you will be dependent on drugs forever. And the only way out of that is to actually get well. And one of the most common comments from the interns and residents that rotated our facility, we have about 30 doctors a year that train with us, is they say, wow, it's the first time I've ever seen these kind of people getting well. Because it's not even part of the paradigm of medicine. Medicine isn't based entirely on the premise that you will be taking these drugs forever.
Wow. So many people come to the True North Health Center, and if they need to lose weight, they do lose weight, but then they go back to their lives and they often gain the weight back.
Yes.
Why does it seem so much more difficult for people to maintain weight loss than it is to lose it?
Well, when they're at the True North Health Center, they're in an environment that's supportive of healthy eating. It's relatively easy to do. When they go home, they have all the energy vampires out there. The energy vampires are people that do what they do best, and that's make other people as fat and sick and miserable as they are, so by comparison, they don't have to feel so bad. And of course, they're also activating the whole pleasure trap circuitry where their brains are saying, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be nice to get a little artificial stimulation of dopamine? You really deserve it after you have to put up with those people all day. They're driving 2 hours a day to a job they hate, working with people they despise for a company they detest, to make products they don't believe in, make money they don't need because they think they're unhappy because they have a short-term pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent deficiency. It's not true. The fact is, happiness is more about getting your brain serotonin levels up, not your brain dopamine levels up. So no amount of short-term pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent behavior is ever going to ultimately result in an increased happiness. In order to increase happiness, you have to do the things that increase those circuitries. And that, interesting, the most important component of that turns out to be health. Very difficult to be consistently happy if you compromise your health. And we know that, in order to maximize health, we have to focus on the causes.
Which are diet, sleep, and exercise, right?
Exactly right.
Wow, that's amazing. So would you mind sharing a story of a patient that you once had that didn't come to True North for the typical reasons? I believe it was a lady that was dropped off by her family because you were actually cheaper than nursing home.
We just opened the new facility, and we had gotten a call from one of my patients and asked if their mother could just stay with us for a little bit. She was supposed to be going to a nursing home. But the woman in the nursing home that had been transferred to the hospital to die, for some reason didn't die and got transferred back to the nursing home. So that they said the bed wasn't quite available. They were sure it wouldn't take very long, but just she could just come and just hang with us because they needed a break from having been caring for her. So we said that was fine. And she came and she was very much overweight, about 120 pounds overweight, difficulty walking. She's on 13 medications. She had high blood pressure. She had diabetes. And she couldn't really walk very well, so we had to bring her meals to her. We would bring her large salads and steamed vegetables, and she would tell the person bringing them at first, oh no, there's a mistake. I'm supposed to lose weight. And we explained to her if she wanted to lose weight, she had to eat all this food. You know, that was part of the process. And so she would work hard, diligently, eating as much as she possibly could of the food. And surprising to her, every day she started losing weight. And she lost 2 pounds the first week, and 2 pounds the second week, and 2 pounds the third week, and the fourth week, and the fifth week. And by the time we got to about half the year, she about 26 weeks in, she had lost over 50 pounds. And now she was able to start walking. We were phasing down her medications. We put chairs around the courtyard. She would walk from chair to chair. And eventually we would take chairs away, and soon she could walk all the way around the courtyard. And eventually she even got to the point she could walk next door to the fitness center and do work on the treadmill. And I always remember, because this weight loss had been very progressive and consistent, till one day she only lost 1 pound that week. And we were having our grand rounds meeting. And I said to the interns, I said, oh, it looks like she might be cheating a little bit. And they said, well, maybe the weight loss is just slowing down. I said, no, not slowing down. She's cheating. She's getting into something. They said, oh, no, she wouldn't cheat. And I said, let's go find out. So I'm thinking, God, I hope she's cheating, because I'm about to accuse her. And I walked into her room, and I could tell immediately, because she went, I said, okay, hand it over. She said, I don't know what you mean. I said, hand it over. She opened up the drawer. She had bought a package of peanuts store on the way next door to the fitness center. And she'd been having a few of those, just a few. But that was enough to slow her rate of weight down. We took the peanuts away, back to 2 pounds. She ultimately lost over 100 pounds in the first year. She got off all but one of her medications. We put her on a 10-day fast, resolved that one. Ultimately, we were able to send her home. So she never did end up going to the nursing home. So that was pretty fun.
That's an incredible story. It must be very gratifying to actually see your patients get well.
You know, I just saw a guy, AJ, that is a 30-year follow-up. So this is a guy I saw. He was 55 years old, was a painting contractor when I first saw him. And he came into me because he had trouble raising his arm over his head because he had osteoarthritis in the shoulder. And, you know, as a painter, that's a problem, because he was having trouble rolling the ceilings. And I said, look, if you want to overcome that issue, you have to get healthy. And that means first you have to quit smoking. You have to quit drinking. You have to give up the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, and adopt a whole plant food diet. And he said, well, if he did that, would he overcome his problem? I said, well, yeah, I thought he would do real well. And he said, how long would he have to do it? Would he have to do it forever? And I said, no, of course not. All I ask is 50 years. You do it for 50 years, and then we'll reevaluate. And he said, oh, yeah, you think you're funny, don't you? But anyway, long story short, he actually quit smoking. He gave up alcohol, adopted a plant-based diet, made significant improvements, and then I lost track of it. So then, just recently came into the office. I haven't seen him for 14 years. So now, the first time I saw him was 30 years ago. He was 55. Now he's 85. And he said, I asked him why he was there. He said he was there for a checkup. I said, oh, that's good. And I said, and you know, how's it been going? He said, well, he said, the diet seems to be working because he's still working.
Wow. I
said, oh, so you're still painting? He said, yeah, and all his crew are dead, including his son, who died at 60 from cardiac arrest, not doing the diet. And I told him, I said, I'm so sorry to hear about your son. He goes, no, it's okay. I do the ceilings myself now. And I said, are you telling me your osteoarthritis got better in the shoulder? He says, no, not really, but he got an airless paint sprayer. So he's able to do the ceilings. He said that he would make another appointment in 14 more years when he's 99. But he said if anything came up before then, he'd let me know.
That's incredible. Going back to the patient that was sneaking a few peanuts and it stalled her weight loss, a lot of people say that, you know, to eat nuts to lose weight. And my question is, are there any foods that we must have? Are there any superfoods or magical foods that we must have either for health or weight loss?
Well, there's no magical foods, but there's certainly classes of foods that are critically important for people's success. And vegetables are, I think, are the most important base in terms of volume. If you don't get enough salad and steamed vegetables in the diet, it's hard for people to be successful. Fresh fruit used appropriately, particularly whole fruit, can also be very healthy. And you need to get enough complex carbohydrates, whether it's potatoes, squash, rice, beans, whatever, so that you don't get too weak and skinny. You know, the idea is that you want to get as much as you need, but not more. And the way you do that is to work with your satiety mechanisms. That means large volumes of salad and steamed vegetables, portion-controlled quantities of the more concentrated foods. And the more you're struggling with weight loss, the more conscious you have to be about things like order and volume. You know, males don't have to work quite as hard as females because they tend to lose weight at a little faster clip. But there are some women who are highly healthy, highly efficient, very good at absorption. And even some of the complex carbohydrates have to be controlled in terms of you have to eat the salad first and then the steamed vegetables, because if they start with, say, rice or something, they'll eat more rice than what they need, and as a consequence, it'll slow their rate of weight loss.
Would there be a reason for someone to sequence their meals if they didn't need to lose weight?
If weight isn't an issue, I think it becomes much less of a deal. As long as all of your food is whole natural foods, you may not have to worry quite as much about order and volume. These tools are mostly to help people minimize weight gain or to help with weight loss. If somebody is, let's say, for example, somebody's underweight, we might reverse the order. Might we say, well, let's try to have a little of the soup or the more concentrated food first, and then we'll have some steamed vegetables, and then we'll have salad. We don't want to fill up on salad if the problem is getting enough calories in. Salad, large volume, is great to keep weight down or to lose weight. To gain weight, it's not going to really help you too much. Doesn't mean you don't want some salad. It just means you wouldn't be forcing the huge volumes that we would for people where we're trying to lose weight. You can basically turn it on and off the weight loss by turning up and down the concentration of your caloric density in the diet.
I find that to be a challenge for some people, finding that sweet spot between starchy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables.
Right. That's why I think a good rule of thumb is eat as much salad and steamed vegetables as you can shove in, and then, get focused on a more portion control volume, one serving, whatever that is for you, of the concentrated carbohydrates. If you're still hungry, go have another pound of salad.
Right. That makes sense. I find that even though I'm not trying to lose weight, if I don't eat my salad first, I don't eat it. In other words, like once I've eaten my sweet potatoes, I don't want to eat my salad.
Let's think about why that might be. If your brain is saying, eat the most concentrated food potentially available to you. So if you fill up on potatoes at 500 calories a pound or 400 calories a pound, there's not that much room left for the 100 calorie a pound less desirable salad. So that's part of the benefit of eating the salad first. When you're hungry, salad tastes good. When you're not hungry, it's not as appealing. That's why do you think people have to eat desserts that are 1,500 calories or more per pound? Because after you shoved yourself full of a bunch of food, your brain doesn't want to eat anymore. You have to drug it into wanting to desire it. And that's why desserts are always such hyper-concentrated food products that we should be avoiding.
So many people, at least that I meet, are afraid to eat these complex carbohydrates like the potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, rice, and beans. Do you have any advice to those people, or if they come to your center, to tell them that they can eat these foods and be healthy and lose weight?
You say you're afraid because of digestive challenges, or
afraid because they've been told that carbs are bad, carbs are fattening.
Well, and refined carbohydrates are a problem, and that's why sugar, flour, and these products need to be avoided. But there are also minimally processed complex carbohydrates, which are actually staple of the diet. The problem is 86% of all the calories that are eaten from carbohydrate are flour, sugar. So from a practical standpoint, when people talk about carbs, that's all most people are eating are refined carbohydrates. So it's fine for them to say, if they put the word refined in front of it, I would agree with them. They should always avoid refined carbohydrates. But that's not the same thing as plant-based complex carbohydrates, which are nutrient high, moderate caloric density, and highly satiating. Right. That's why people that are fat, that get fat eating fat, if they just say lived on potatoes, for example, they would lose weight. So it's not the potatoes. When they take the potatoes and turn it into a butter boat, yeah, they got all kinds of problems with it. And they're taking potatoes and turning them into French fries, and they're doing. It's actually the fat and the salt and the other stuff that's the culprit, not the potato itself that's the problem.
Thank you. What would you say to somebody that's given up hope that they would ever lose weight, or maybe you had a patient that gave up hope and eventually didn't? How was their life different?
Well, a lot of people think it's helpless and hopeless because their entire life experience and everybody they know is that everybody fails. There is no way to lose weight. In fact, many doctors even believe that they've given up. It's not even worth their valuable time to talk to people about diet and lifestyle change because they don't think the patients can do it. And frankly, they can't do it either. And you can't do it unless you escape the pleasure trap. It's not possible for an addict. Like saying, look, do you take alcoholics and say, look, just drink beer and wine and you'll be fine? Do you tell alcoholics that that's a good strategy? No, because it never works. Or tell the alcoholic, look, you're a drunk. You just have to learn to drink moderately. So put your alcohol in a smaller cup and use a little spoon, and then you won't be a drunk anymore. We don't tell alcoholics that because it never works. The only thing that works with alcoholics is what? Tell them the truth. Stop drinking. Stop taking in the chemicals that are fooling your brain and leading you to addiction. And if people can do that, they can be successful and their life gets better. When you have overweight people, you need to stop lying to them and say, well, just eat less and you'll be fine. No, you need to stop eating the chemicals that are fooling your brain and leading you down the path of obesity and disease. And those chemicals are oil, salt, and sugar. Now, some people say, well, let's just stop the oil, or let's just stop the sugar, or let's just stop the salt and oil or the sugar. But very few people are willing to tell the truth, which is if you want to be successful, you have to go SOS free. You have to get rid of the salt, oil, and sugar in the diet. And then you can see very quickly what the net effect is. It's not the easiest way by any means. It's probably the most difficult in some ways, but it's also the most predictable and consistent. People that adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet consistently lose weight, and they reverse their pathologies that are associated with dietary excess. They recover their health. We see that every single day at True North Health Center.
Well, I agree with you because I follow your diet and it worked for me and all the people that I work with that follow it. But what you're suggesting, Dr. Goldhamer, is abstinence. And when I tell people that, they say, well, I'm afraid if I give up, for example, sugar, I'm going to want it even more and then I'm going to binge on it.
And you will want it even more at first. And if you indulge in it, you will binge on it. So they're right. Their instincts are right. It's just like alcoholics. They're saying, oh, I'm afraid if I don't drink at all, I'm going to really want it. And they will for a while. But if you talk to people that have recovered from their alcoholism, they're not going to tell you, oh, yeah, my life was a lot better when I was a drunk. I really want to go back to being a drunk again. Okay? I don't think so. And people that have struggled through the process of weight loss, yes, they'll tell you it's really difficult. And yes, they do really want it. And that if you read The Pleasure Trap, or more importantly now, you can listen to it, because AJ did such a great job of doing the audio version of The Pleasure Trap, you'll understand how this cycle and mechanisms work. And so it's absolutely true what their fears are, but they have to overcome those, just like drunks have to overcome it, just like smokers have to overcome their addiction. People that are struggling with weight loss have to recognize, yes, they're an addict, and they're going to have to overcome the addiction to the chemicals added to the food that are making them fat. And there is no magic pill or potion or powder that's going to circumvent the laws of physics and thermodynamics.
Amen. So, Dr. Goldhamer, what is the real truth about weight loss?
The real truth about weight loss is that you have to eat less than what you're burning, which means you have to avoid the things that are compromising your ability to health promoting diet. Health results from healthful living. Healthful living involves diet, sleep, and exercise. A healthy diet is a whole plant food diet that's free of chemicals like salt, oil, and sugar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goldhamer.
It's my pleasure.